Sir Iain Duncan Smith is a member of Britain's House of Commons. Many of you, my viewers, you'll remember him too as the former leader of the Conservative Party and as the reformist Secretary of State for Work and Pensions in David Cameron's government. Now, presently, he served as chairman for Boris Johnson's leadership campaign following the departure of Prime Minister May. Now, he backed a winner there, of course, because Johnson later won the general election, as we know here, in a landslide. Knighted earlier this year for his political and public service, Sir Iain Duncan Smith joins me now from the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for making time for us in Australia. We're all the world, I know, watching the issue of coronavirus and China in particular very, very closely. You talk about Project Kowtow. Why are so many Western leaders so obsequious to Beijing?
Good morning. Good morning to you. I think the problem that arises out of all of this is that over a period of time, I think China has set out to allay fears and to have a strategic view that they need to be in all these markets and they need to be dominant. And because they are a totalitarian state in a sense, they can have this overarching strategic view. So all their companies are bound back to them and therefore do what they've been asked to do. So if you look at various areas, they've gone in low. Prices are cheap. Obviously, labor was much cheaper. And so many of these things that were being produced in an open market are looking for lower cost prices. And so they've moved naturally over, having no political strategic view from any of the countries. It includes America, you know, much of Europe. Germany is hugely dependent on Chinese parts, particularly for their motor industry and their manufacturers. And all of that has led to this progressive dominance. And it's quite interesting to look at the difference between what happened when the SARS outbreak took place and when this took place. First and foremost, the WHO was incredibly strong with China right at the beginning, and I think that nipped it in the bud. But then they weren't so dominant. So much of the stuff that they produce now was not being produced in China at that stage, and whereas it is at this stage. And I'll give you a good example of where some of these low-tech things become quite a problem. I was talking to a producer of hand sanitizers, and I asked him, you must be absolutely booming at the moment. But I said, there's lots of spaces on the shelves. He said, the problem isn't we can't get the chemicals. The problem is that the sanitizer dispenser bottles, all the contracts are made in China. So they went down, they shut down, we have no bottles. And so just a little example of how now they're in the position to be able to dictate. And now as we emerge, or they emerge from it, and we still don't know how real their figures are, we realize now that all their equipment they're sending to the West is part of the soft power process, which is basically saying, well, you really are reliant on us, and therefore we don't need to rethink this at the end of this process.
Look, we have the same issue here. We've got plenty of machinists who can make masks. We previously only had one company left in Australia making masks. They were all coming from China. But when we retooled a lot of businesses to make masks and other equipment here, we couldn't get the materials, the cottons, the fabrics and all the other things out of China because China was in lockdown mode. Now they're back. They're operating and they're trying to flog us the masks for the disease they caused in the first place. Do you think we'll ever get the real detail out of all of this on the extent of coronavirus in China? And also, you know, I heard your comments about the World Health Organization, but they have been deplorable in the way in which they stood and protected China in the very early days of this crisis, when a lot in the rest of the world, and certainly in Australia, we closed our borders and we took a beating from Chinese officials, but the WHO, World Health Organization, was in their camp.
Yeah, I mean, two things about the World Health Organization, I think, is they have not covered themselves in glory in the earlier stages of this. They certainly didn't press down on the Chinese. You bear in mind, of course, that the original doctor, and there were two doctors particularly, I think, who called out the fact that there was a real crisis, and they were silenced by the Chinese government, so that there was time between the moment when it was happening and when finally they went public with it. WHO, I don't think, did a single thing about that. And that's the point I was making earlier. The big difference between when the ex-Norwegian Prime Minister was running the WHO, where she was very hard on them straight away at the beginning, this time round, they've been much easier. And in fact, it's intriguing. I think the WHO has spent a lot of its time actually having a go at Western governments about the way they've behaved over this particular outbreak, and had nothing but quiet praise for the Chinese. I was interested, I don't know if any of your viewers have seen, they should do if they haven't, the video of the Hong Kong Chinese lady trying to interview one of the health officials from the WHO asking about Taiwan, and he won't answer. In fact, he shuts the video down. I mean, it's disgraceful, frankly. That's the only way to say about it. Quite a disgrace.
This is why initiatives like the Belt and Road matter to the Chinese, because they've got a whole lot of nations. In the case of Ethiopia, and the head of WHO, the chief of WHO, is an Ethiopian. They've brought a lot of silence around the world, which leads me to ask Huawei in Australia. And I worked for the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott when Huawei was banned on the 5G network, and it was banned also. Yes, we did then, and it was also banned with Labor governments as well. Yet Britain, under Conservatives, I hate to admit, have allowed them in. Now, I say it's not into the core parts of the system, but you and I are not stupid. It's a really dangerous move. Is it going to get changed?
Well, we're working on that at the moment. There's no question now, there's a very significant number of Conservatives in the House of Commons who, last time they were asked, it wasn't specifically about this, but it was related. The government nearly lost the vote on that, and there was a reason for it. People are now beginning to wake up to the threat that is posed to a country, a democratic, freedom-loving country like ourselves and many of the others like yourselves. The real danger is when you become so dominated by a country where there is no respect for human rights, no democracy, no one elects the government, they have no rights. I mean, the base for all of a free market isn't just the ability to say, we'll trade with everybody. People forget the serious base on which you have to build a free market is on the rule of law. And the rule of law, at the heart of it, the most important feature is the right to own property. And this is the point that I make. In all those countries that we've talked about, yourselves, ours, America, France, these rights are upheld. They are not upheld in China. So we're treating them as though they are a kind of free market country to be dealt with easily. And they don't. They don't treat us like that. They have a strategic view about where they want to be. For example, Huawei has been busy building their business, undercutting all these other companies. There used to be about 12 in the market. Now there are only 3 outside China. It's the same with batteries. There are a few companies in China with very many people working in them, dominating now the battery production market. Guess what the West has decided to do? Gone hell for leather for electric cars and buses. Who's going to be producing all of those? Mostly the Chinese. But they also put their systems in so that if you then decide you don't want their batteries any longer, you can't change because their system is the one that refurbishes and challenges it.
I have to say the same thing here. 70% of our wind farms are foreign-owned. Most of our wind farm turbines come from China, as does solar panels. And of course, we're making our electricity grid here, despite all the coal, gas and uranium, more and more dominated by renewables, and the renewables are all coming from China. Just before we go, I've got to ask you, how's the UK coping at the moment? We're watching your graphs as closely as we're watching Italy and Spain, and the economic ramifications too.
This is enormous. We will not really understand the scale of this economically and in health terms until it's finally all over. The government is doing the best it can, I have to tell you, trying to garner enough testing equipment when the rest of the world is out trying to do the same, trying to make sure we get enough PPE, which we've got huge amounts, but, people are going through that at a rate of knots, and some places are finding it quite difficult. And we only went into lockdown 2 weeks ago. So that means all the figures you're seeing at the moment, over 2,000 deaths, etc., they're all from before we went into lockdown. So the government now will be hoping in the next 7 days or so, we will start to see a flattening of that curve as the lockdown, in other words, people not on the streets. I mean, I've never seen a time when basically in London or in my constituency, there's hardly anybody on the streets at all. Everybody's locked away at home. So it's a desperate time, and economically, as we emerge from this, there are going to be serious problems for us all because the whole world economy has gone into shock, and getting that rebooted is going to be the critical element as soon as we get out. Otherwise, we're going to have governments going bust, basically, trying to afford all those who are unemployed. So the government's doing all of that, lending money to businesses, but it's not easy at the moment. It's not easy, and those who are uber critical are really, I'm afraid, playing games.
Your challenges are our challenges here too. I have to leave it there. I really appreciate your time tonight, Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.